In 1865, when slavery still stained the soil of the American South, not just in laws, but in hearts, one slave girl did the unthinkable. Her name was Amara. She had been born behind wooden walls and iron rules. She scrubbed floors she'd never walk freely on, ate scraps in silence, was taught to lower her gaze and forget the shape of her own name. Until one quiet night, exhausted beyond reason, Amara fell asleep in her master's bed. Not by defiance, not by design, but by accident. And when the master found her there, curled in linens not made for her skin, he did not call for punishment. He simply watched. And from that moment, everything began to unravel. Her place, his pride, the mistress's fury, and the fragile walls that held their world together. What started as a single mistake became a turning point that none of them would ever forget. This is not a fairy tale. It is not a romance. It is the story of how being seen changed everything. This is the story of Amara Freeman. And it all began the night she fell asleep where no slave ever dared to dream. In the summer of 1865, the sun rose slowly over the Ashford plantation in Georgia, casting golden light across fields of cotton and sorrow. Inside the grand house, the wooden floor creaked beneath the hurried steps of Amara, a young house slave barely 16. Her hands were rough from years of scrubbing, her feet sore from never standing still. Each morning was the same: clean the master's study, fetch water for Miss Evelyn's bath, polish the silver, and vanish into corners when eyes of power passed by. The house smelled of wax, damp wood, and perfume that clung to every corner. Amara moved like a shadow, quiet but present, hoping not to draw attention. But exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours in weeks. Her nights were filled with soft cries from the slave quarters, whispers of escape, and dreams she could never say aloud. The dreams of freedom, the dreams of a different life. Her day began before the roosters crowed. Mama Tilda, the old midwife, had shaken her awake. "Get movin', girl. Them windows ain't gonna wipe theyself." Amara obeyed without complaint. She had learned long ago that silence kept you safe. The other house staff avoided her eyes as she passed them. Not because they disliked her, but because liking someone in this place meant worry. If one got whipped, the others hurt too. She slipped into the master's quarters with her cleaning rag and a bucket. The room was still and cold. Heavy velvet curtains kept the sun from touching the expensive furniture. A large four-poster bed sat like a throne, untouched since Silas Ashford left the night before for town. Amara began wiping the edges of the carved wood. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from sheer weariness. The rug beneath her knees muffled the sound of her breath. Silas Ashford was a name spoken with fear. The master of the house, owner of over 100 slaves, and known across Georgia for his wealth and temper. He was in his 40s, his face always unreadable, his voice deep and calm like thunder before a storm. His daughter Evelyn, 17 and sharp-eyed, was the only softness seen on the estate, though even she could wield her father's coldness when challenged. Evelyn had grown up in silks and sunlight, her hands untouched by work. She often watched Amara with a strange mix of curiosity and pity, sometimes even offering her books to dust that Amara was forbidden to read. But Evelyn never intervened when the lash was raised. That morning, Evelyn was away with the pastor's family. The house was emptier than usual. Silence filled every hallway. And that silence, that warm stillness, led Amara to do something she never intended. She sat on the edge of the master's bed. She only meant to rest for a moment. Just a breath. Her body sank into the soft mattress, and before she knew it, her eyes closed. The world faded. Her hand still clutched the cleaning rag. The bucket sat nearby. The room remained untouched, except for the girl curled in the master's sheets, lost to sleep. When Silas returned, he moved silently through the house, boots echoing in the halls. His meeting in town had ended early, and a storm was rolling in. Thunder cracked in the distance as he pushed open the door to his chambers, and stopped cold. There on his bed lay a slave, sleeping peacefully on his bed. His eyes narrowed, mouth tightening. He stepped forward slowly, stopping beside the bed. Then, in one sudden motion, he grabbed her shoulder. Amara awoke with a gasp, heart thudding like a drum. Her eyes shot open to meet Silas Ashford's. Her throat closed. "Master, I ain't mean to, please, sir." Her words stumbled. He said nothing at first, just stared at her, reading every inch of her face. His jaw clenched. His voice, when it came, was low and cold. "Out." One word. No shouting. No whip. Just that single, deadly command. Amara stumbled off the bed, nearly slipping on the rug, and fled from the room like a ghost chased by fire. Down the hall, down the servants' stairs, into the back corridor where she pressed herself against the wall and tried not to cry. Her chest ached with panic. She had made a mistake. A dangerous one. She would be sold. Beaten. Worse. But no punishment came. Not that day. The other slaves whispered when she returned to the quarters. Josiah, her childhood friend from the stables, shook his head. "You touched the master's bed? Girl, are you trying to die?" Amara couldn't answer. She lay down on her mat that night with her back to everyone, staring at the cracked wall. Her fingers still smelled faintly of the soap she used to clean his room. Sleep did not come easy, nor did the feeling of shame. She had broken a rule. But in that brief sleep, she had felt human again, and that was more dangerous than any whip. The morning after the incident, Amara rose before dawn with her limbs still stiff from fear. The sky outside was gray, and the air inside the quarters felt heavier than usual. Mama Tilda didn't look at her as she handed her a pail. Josiah kept his distance, his usual smirk replaced with worry. Amara's steps to the big house felt different. Each creak of the floorboard beneath her feet seemed to whisper, "You should not be here." She wondered if the master had spoken to anyone. Wondered if Evelyn would call her out or if the overseer had already been told. Every time someone glanced her way, she thought it would be her last free breath. But when she reached the kitchen, the cook simply waved her off. "Miss Evelyn's back. Go help her dress," the cook mumbled, and Amara did as she was told. Evelyn was seated by her vanity mirror, brushing her golden hair in long strokes. Her reflection caught Amara's eyes, and for a second, they locked. Evelyn's eyes were cool, unreadable. She didn't speak until Amara began folding the gowns laid across the bed. "Did something happen while I was gone?" she asked without turning. Amara froze for half a breath. "No, miss," she said softly. Evelyn placed her brush down slowly. "Father has been quiet since returning. That usually means he's angry or confused." She stood and walked toward the window, voice distant. "Be careful, Amara." It was the first time she had said her name. Not girl. Not you there. Just Amara. And that name, said in Evelyn's soft voice, sent a wave of confusion through her. She simply nodded and left the room. The rest of the day passed in silence. But eyes followed her. The butler paused too long when she passed. The laundry maid whispered behind her hand. Everyone felt something had changed, even if they didn't know what. Amara kept her head down, scrubbing harder than usual, working faster. But late that afternoon, a message came. The master's voice summoned her to the back garden. Her knees nearly buckled. She wiped her hands and stepped out into the warm light, heart hammering. Silas stood beneath the shade of a tree, hands behind his back, watching the field hands in the distance. "Walk with me," he said without looking. They walked in silence. She didn't dare speak unless asked. His boots crushed the dry leaves beneath them. Her bare feet moved softly beside his. Finally, he said, "You didn't run." She blinked, startled. "No, sir." He stopped and turned. Most would have, after what you did. His eyes held hers, unreadable as ever. Why didn't you? Amara's voice shook. Ain't nowhere to run, sir. He stared at her for a moment more, then turned and continued walking. Tell the cook I want cornbread tonight, he said plainly, ending the moment as if it had never happened. She curtsied and fled, breath shallow. That night, the cook handed her a slice of warm cornbread without asking. From the master, she said. Amara ate slowly, confused. What was happening? Was he angry? Was he watching her? Or was something else stirring behind those cold blue eyes? Days passed, and yet the air around Amara still felt like it held its breath. Silas did not speak to her again, not directly, but she noticed things that changed. He began appearing in places where she worked, standing in the doorway while she scrubbed the stairs, sitting silently in the parlor as she dusted the piano. He never said a word, never touched her, but his eyes followed her like the wind shadows a flame. Amara's heart beat louder each time she felt his presence. She told herself not to think about it, to focus, to work. But the master's gaze had become a weight she could not ignore. It pressed on her back and stayed in her thoughts long after she returned to her quarters. Even Josiah noticed. He's looking at you, Mara. Like you something he ain't sure he own yet. That ain't safe. Josiah's words lingered, heavy in her mind. That night, they stood behind the kitchen, near the smokehouse. The others were inside, eating in silence, but Josiah had pulled her aside. Don't play with fire, Amara, he said, voice low. Masters like him don't feel. They take. She didn't reply. What could she say? That she didn't want this attention? That she hadn't asked for it? He saw her confusion and sighed. You still got that fire in you. Don't let him take that too. Amara looked down at her hands. Hands that worked, served, obeyed. But lately, they had begun to shake when Silas came near. She couldn't decide if it was fear or something worse. Something she couldn't name. Evelyn's behavior changed too. She became quiet, more distant, and when Amara tried to help her dress one morning, she waved her off coldly. You can go, she said sharply, her tone cutting. As Amara turned to leave, Evelyn added under her breath, You think you're different now, don't you? Just because he's watching. Amara turned, stunned, but Evelyn didn't meet her eyes. The message was clear. Evelyn had seen it too. That invisible cord between them. The glance that lasted too long. The silence thick with something unspoken. Amara wanted to explain, but how could she? She hadn't asked for any of this. She just wanted to survive. That evening, Amara found something small folded inside her cleaning rag, a white handkerchief, embroidered with her initials. Her real initials. Not the ones branded into the ledger, but the name her mother whispered at night. Amara Nia Freeman. Her hands trembled. No one should have known. She stared at the fabric under moonlight. The stitching was careful, as if done slowly and with intention. It was too fine for another slave to have sewn. This came from someone with access to better tools, better thread. Silas. But how had he known? She had never written it down, never spoken her full name aloud. Her mother had given her the name before she died, and it had stayed buried under years of silence. For it to appear now meant one terrifying thing. He had been watching her longer than she realized. Watching and listening. But why? What did he want? The next morning brought no answers. She worked silently, keeping her eyes low. The holes seemed to stretch forever. She felt like a doll moved from one room to another. In the parlor, she caught her reflection in the glass of the piano. Pale, tired eyes. A face that seemed to no longer belong to her. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt it. Silas stood behind her, a shadow that blocked out thought. Did you like the gift? He asked. His voice was soft, unusual. Amara turned slowly. She nodded once, careful. Yes, master. Thank you. A pause. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather of his coat and the faint scent of tobacco. Do you remember your mother well? The question hit like a stone. Amara hesitated. Some. Her voice. Her stories. Silas studied her. She named you Freeman. Did she believe she could change your fate? Amara blinked back sudden heat behind her eyes. She wouldn't cry. Not in front of him. She believed I wasn't born to kneel, she whispered. The silence stretched. Silas didn't reply. He simply turned and walked away, his boots clicking softly on the wood floor. But Amara stood still long after, her breath caught. That was the first time she had said such a thing aloud. And he had heard it. All of it. Later that evening, Mama Tilda found her behind the well, hands shaking. You look like you've seen a ghost, child. Amara looked up slowly. What do you do, Mama T, when someone with power sees you? Really sees you? The old woman sat beside her. You ask why. And then you ask what they plan to take next. 'Cause they always take. She patted Amara's hand. You got to guard your soul, baby girl. 'Cause that's what they can't own unless you give it. Amara wanted to believe her, but something in her had already shifted. That night, she tucked the handkerchief into the lining of her shift and lay awake, eyes wide open, watching the ceiling for answers that never came. The handkerchief haunted her. It wasn't just cloth. It was knowledge. A message. Someone had gone through trouble to stitch her secret name onto it, carefully, neatly, with purpose. But only one person could have done that. Silas Ashford. How had he known? She never told anyone her middle name. Not even Josiah. That night, she tucked the cloth into her shirt, over her heart, where no one could see. But it burned there, like a brand. The next day, her routine went unchanged. Floors to scrub. Silver to polish. But her hands moved differently. Her chest was tight with questions. She couldn't look at him when he passed, but she felt him pause behind her. Linger. He didn't speak, not yet. But his silence was louder than any voice. It wasn't the silence of power. It was the silence of watching. Of waiting. By midday, the whispers among the staff had grown. No one said her name aloud, but their eyes followed her like shadows. A younger maid, Elsie, bumped into her near the laundry basin and whispered, "You better be careful. You walk in with fire on your back." Amara said nothing, just bent over her work and scrubbed harder. She knew fire. She had lived in it her whole life. But this felt different. This fire was quiet and warm, and that made it far more dangerous. That night, Evelyn entered the kitchen and found Amara slicing apples. The silence between them was heavy. Evelyn walked slowly until she stood across the table. "Do you love him?" she asked, the question cracking the stillness like thunder. Amara's knife stopped mid-cut. Her voice trembled. "Miss Evelyn, I don't even understand what you mean." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "He gave you something. Something with your name. The name you never say. Don't lie to me. I saw it. I saw you touch it." Amara's breath caught. Her first instinct was to deny everything, but the truth sat between them like a flame. "I don't love nobody who sees me as less," she said quietly. "Then why are you still here?" Evelyn snapped. Amara lifted her eyes. "Because I got a little brother who needs me. Because freedom costs more than I have. And because runnin' ain't the same as being free." Evelyn said nothing for a long time. Then she picked up one of the sliced apples and bit into it. "I used to think I was better than you," she said at last. "But now I think you might be braver." She left without another word. That night, Josiah found Amara near the stables, looking up at the sky. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. Just trying to figure out what I'm becoming. He frowned. You ain't his. You hear me? No matter what name he learns, no matter what gift he leaves, you ain't his. She smiled sadly. That's what Mama Tilda said too. But the more they look at you, Josiah, the more you start wondering what they see, and if it's more than what you think you are. The next morning, Silas called her name in front of 3 staff. Just her name. No command. No anger. Just her name, like it was a fact he wanted to remember. And in that small moment, something shifted. He handed her a folded piece of parchment. Deliver this to the tailor in town. Wait for the reply. It was the first time she had ever been sent off the plantation alone. She clutched the letter and walked the dirt road with shaking legs. The town was small, eyes wide and mouth silent as she passed. She kept her head down. But when the tailor handed her a small box wrapped in fine cloth, she knew something was wrong. He said you were to open this yourself, before bringing it back. Said it was yours. Her hands shook as she unwrapped the cloth behind the building, hidden from view. Inside was a necklace, silver delicate, with a tiny charm shaped like a lily. It looked expensive. Too expensive. Her name, Amara, was etched into the charm. Not Freeman. Just Amara. Her breath caught. Her fingers curled around the chain. Then she quickly wrapped it back up and tucked it deep into her apron. She walked home with the wind at her back and a storm in her chest. That night, she didn't eat. She stared at the necklace by candlelight in the servant quarters, heart beating like a drum. What did he want from her? She went to Mama Tilda before dawn. The old woman was peeling sweet potatoes in silence. Amara sat beside her and placed the necklace on the table. Mama Tilda looked at it, then at her. Do you want it? Amara didn't answer. Then it ain't a gift. It's a hook. Pretty, sharp, and deep. Later that day, Silas summoned her again. This time, to the library. No one else was there. Books lined the walls, dust glinting in the late light. He didn't offer her a seat, just looked at her for a long moment. You opened the box. She nodded. Do you like it? She hesitated, then answered truthfully. I don't understand it. Silas stepped closer. It's just a thing, Amara. A thing to remind you that you are seen. Her voice cracked. I don't need reminding. I need safety. I need food and rest and to not be watched like I'm a prize. He flinched at her tone, but said nothing. She turned to leave, heart thudding. His voice stopped her. You matter. She didn't look back. Not then. The morning came heavy with heat and silence. The kind of silence that follows a storm that hasn't broken yet. Amara walked through the grand house with a quiet rhythm, her steps lighter than before, but her thoughts heavier than ever. The necklace still rested in the pocket of her apron, though she hadn't dared wear it. She had no idea what it truly meant. A gift? A warning? A trap wrapped in silver? The whispers among the staff had become harder to ignore. She wasn't just the house girl anymore. She was the girl the master looked at too long, the one who returned from town with fine packages, the one who might fall. Evelyn didn't speak to her, not even to insult her. She moved through the halls like a ghost, pale and unreadable. It was worse than shouting. At least shouting made a sound. This silence felt like judgment pressed between every heartbeat. Josiah avoided the big house altogether. Amara saw him once from a distance, tending the horses. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. That absence stung more than anything. That night, Mama Tilda touched Amara's shoulder gently and said, "Child, you've been marked. And not just by him. By the whole place. Even the walls see you different now." Amara nodded, not trusting her voice. She wanted to explain that she had done nothing, that she didn't ask to be seen. But that was the thing about power. It saw what it wanted. The next day, Silas called for her again. This time in the garden, under the wide oak tree that Evelyn used to read beneath as a child. He was seated on a bench, coat discarded, sleeves rolled up. He looked more like a man than a master, less carved from stone. When Amara approached, he looked up, eyes searching hers. "You haven't worn it," he said. She kept her hands folded, voice calm. "I don't know what it means." He stood, stepping closer. "It means I see you, and I want you to be seen." Her heart twisted. Seen by who, master? The folks who already whisper when I pass? The ones who think I've been touched in ways I haven't? Her voice cracked. Or seen by your daughter, who can't even say my name now without tasting salt? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I never asked for this. I only asked that you clean my house." Amara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Then stop giving me pieces of your world. 'Cause every time you do, I lose a piece of mine." She turned, walking away before he could stop her. That night, she tucked the necklace into the dirt beneath the tree outside the quarters. Buried it like a secret. She told herself that if she couldn't throw it away, she could at least put it somewhere it couldn't see her. The next morning, Evelyn exploded. It happened in the dining room, in front of staff. A plate had gone missing, a mistake perhaps, or a setup, and Evelyn turned her rage on Amara. "Is this what my father pays you in gifts for? Stealing? Pretending to be better than you are?" The words were knives. The silence afterward was worse. Amara looked at her, eyes calm, voice steady. "I don't pretend, Miss Evelyn. I just survive." Evelyn slapped her. A single sharp strike that cracked through the room. Amara didn't move. Didn't cry. Just stood tall, blood hot in her face. Silas entered moments later, and when he saw the redness on Amara's cheek, he froze. He looked from her to Evelyn, who stood rigid, breath fast. "She insulted me," Evelyn said, chin high. Silas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That said everything. Amara was dismissed for the day, sent to the far fields to help carry baskets. She worked until her fingers ached, until her back bent and her mind blurred. That night, Josiah found her at the water barrel, eyes red, skin blistered. He handed her a wet cloth and said nothing, just sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder. After a while, he whispered, "You still got choices, Mara. Might not be good ones, but they're yours." She leaned against him. "Do I? Or did I lose those the day I fell asleep on a bed that wasn't mine?" Back in the big house, Evelyn sat alone in her room, staring at her reflection. She had never slapped anyone before, never felt that kind of rage. But watching her father defend a slave with silence, that broke something in her. She didn't know if it was jealousy or betrayal. She only knew that the girl downstairs was no longer just a slave. She had become something Evelyn could not control, and that terrified her more than anything. The plantation breathed with unease. After Evelyn's outburst and the silence that followed, everything felt tight, like a rope drawn to its final thread. The slaves worked faster, heads lower. The house staff whispered less, but watched more. Amara felt it in her bones, the sense that everything was changing, and not for the better. She moved through the kitchen with care, barely speaking unless spoken to. Every footstep she took echoed in her mind, reminding her she was still here, still surviving. But she knew the line between survival and ruin was getting thinner. Evelyn had not spoken to her since the slap. Not in anger, not in regret. She passed Amara like she was smoke. But that absence, too, was loud. One afternoon, as Amara was polishing the hall banister, she heard Evelyn speaking sharply with her father behind the closed study door. "You've given her power, Father. You think no one notices? You've made her a mirror, and now we all have to look." Silas said nothing loud enough to hear, but the sound of something shattering followed. When Evelyn stormed out, she saw Amara still kneeling, rag in hand. Their eyes met briefly. Evelyn's held tears she refused to shed. That evening, the overseer approached Josiah near the barn with a cold smile. "Heard you been speaking too freely about the house girl. Might want to keep that mouth shut." Josiah said nothing, just nodded once and walked away. But the next morning, his back bore 3 fresh lashes, blamed on a missing bridle. Amara saw the wounds and nearly screamed. "They're sending a message," he told her through gritted teeth. "Not to me. To you." Amara carried that pain like her own. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat outside, near the tree where she had buried the necklace, hands clenched in her lap. The stars blinked above, quiet witnesses. Mama Tilda found her there before sunrise. "When a house starts to crack, the rats run wild," she said, easing down beside her. "And they always bite the ones closest to the light." Amara didn't respond. She felt like her world was shrinking, not growing. But something inside her refused to bend. Later that week, a letter arrived. From Savannah. From Mrs. Adeline Ashford, Silas's mother. A woman known more for her sharp tongue than her soft heart. She was coming. Evelyn's shoulders stiffened when the news came. "She'll set things right," she said aloud to no one in particular. Amara didn't know what that meant, but the way Evelyn said it made her stomach turn. Silas grew even more silent. He didn't speak to Amara at all, but his eyes found her in the halls like clockwork. One day, she passed by the study and saw the necklace she had buried, cleaned and placed in a small glass case on his shelf. She stopped breathing for a moment, then walked on. When Mrs. Ashford arrived, the entire house stood straighter. She swept into the parlor like a winter wind, face lined with age but eyes sharp as broken glass. She kissed her son's cheek, patted Evelyn's hand, and glanced over every servant with the gaze of a hawk. Her words came like honey laced with vinegar. "So many changes here, Silas. Some I expected, others I shall need time to accept." Her gaze landed on Amara once during dinner. Just once. But it was enough to chill her to the bone. 2 nights later, Amara was summoned. Not by Silas. By Mrs. Ashford. The message was brief. "Tea. Parlor. Now." Amara obeyed. The room was lit with candles, the curtains drawn. Mrs. Ashford sat at the head of the table, alone. She poured a second cup and gestured for Amara to sit. The girl hesitated, then obeyed, sitting on the edge of the chair. "You're not a fool," Mrs. Ashford began, "so I won't speak to you like one." She stirred her tea calmly. "I know what my son is doing, or thinking of doing. I know the look in his eyes. He's a man who's been given everything, except peace. And he's trying to find it in you." Amara didn't speak. Mrs. Ashford leaned in. "Let me be clear. That can't happen. Not because you're a slave, but because he is an Ashford. And Ashfords don't bow. Not to affection. Not to scandal. And certainly not to sentiment." She placed a folded envelope on the table. "There's enough money in here to buy your brother's freedom. And your own. You may go north. Disappear. Begin again. But you must leave. Tonight." Amara stared at the envelope. Her throat tightened. "And if I don't?" Mrs. Ashford's smile didn't touch her eyes. "Then I'll ensure you don't live long enough to regret it. A carriage is already waiting." She stood. "Take the gift, girl. Not every noose is made of rope." She walked out, leaving the envelope behind. Amara sat still for a long time. Her fingers brushed the edge of the envelope, trembling. Freedom. For her. For her brother. But at what cost? To leave meant safety. It also meant silence. It meant letting them win. She took the envelope, not as surrender, but as a weapon. That night, she didn't run. She packed quietly, told no one. Not even Josiah. Not even Mama Tilda. She walked down the back stairs, slipped into the carriage, and disappeared into the night. The morning after Amara's departure, the Ashford house stirred like it always did, slowly, methodically, with the precision of tradition. But something was different. The halls felt emptier. The air held a stillness no one dared name. Josiah was the first to notice. He checked the stables, then the back quarters, then the kitchen. No Amara. No trace. Only her folded blanket and the small cloth doll she kept from childhood resting on her cot. He stood there a long time before whispering, "She's gone." Mama Tilda didn't look up when he told her. She only nodded and said, "Good. Maybe she'll find rest where we never could." Silas, however, did not speak. He did not eat. He did not ask questions aloud. But the silence around him became sharp. He walked the halls like a shadow, pausing outside the quarters, outside the garden, even at the tree where the necklace had once been buried. Evelyn watched him closely, saying nothing, but her expression held a strange mix of victory and fear. She had wanted Amara gone, but not like this. Not without a fight. Not without a scream or defiance. Just vanished. 3 days passed before Silas finally went into his study and locked the door. When he emerged, he summoned the driver and gave quiet orders. No one heard what he said, but Josiah saw him leave in the carriage that night, heading down the same road Amara had taken. Josiah stood at the gate, jaw clenched, heart heavy. "You don't even know what you're chasing, do you?" he whispered. "You just feel the ache she left." Meanwhile, the carriage carrying Amara rumbled steadily toward the edge of Savannah, then northward. She sat stiffly in the corner, her brother Brian sleeping beside her, wrapped in a wool blanket. His breathing had steadied, his fever cooled. For the first time in weeks, she saw peace on his face. But in her own chest, a storm churned. The envelope from Mrs. Ashford sat unopened in her lap. She hadn't counted the money yet. Hadn't needed to. The weight of it was enough to know this wasn't charity. It was a price. And she had accepted it. That truth twisted inside her, sharp as glass. They arrived in a small town just past Augusta by midday. The driver handed her a note with an address, lodging prepared in a boarding house under a false name. Miss Freeman, the innkeeper, greeted her with a nod. Amara froze for half a second at the sound of her full name. Real name. Then nodded and entered. The room was small but clean. 2 cots, a basin, a single candle. She sat Brian down, covered him, and exhaled. A full breath. A free one. That night, for the first time in her life, she didn't sleep in fear. But she also didn't sleep in peace. Freedom, she learned quickly, carried its own kind of weight. Back at the plantation, Evelyn found herself restless. She roamed the halls at night, pausing at windows, ears straining for the sound of the carriage returning. Silas had not yet come back. She entered the study once and found the glass case empty. The necklace was gone. Her breath caught. She clutched the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white. She wasn't afraid of ghosts, but she was afraid of silence. And this silence felt like punishment. A week later, a letter arrived. Addressed to Silas, marked from Augusta. He opened it in the privacy of his chamber. Inside was a single line, written in careful handwriting. "You gave me a name. I will not let it be a cage." There was no signature, but he didn't need one. Silas folded the note and placed it in his coat pocket. That night, he sat alone under the oak tree and stared at the stars for hours. Evelyn watched from the window, arms crossed, breath fogging the glass. Mama Tilda, too, saw him there and muttered to herself, "He's learned what loss feels like. But he still don't know how to earn forgiveness." In Augusta, Amara began sewing for the boarding house owner in exchange for extra food. She learned the names of the other women, watched their routines, learned the streets in secret. She used the money sparingly, mostly on medicine for Brian. The rest she saved in a jar she hid beneath a loose floorboard. She called it her never again jar. If anyone ever came for her, the jar would carry them somewhere further. Somewhere freer. One Sunday morning, she passed by a churchyard and paused. Children were laughing. One girl, no older than 8, sat outside with a slate, struggling to copy letters. Amara knelt beside her, offered a kind smile, and helped her write her name. The girl grinned. "You talk like a teacher," she said. Amara blinked. "Maybe I could be," she replied softly. That evening, she asked the Reverend if she could volunteer. "I don't have papers," she warned. He looked at her a long time, then said, "Good. The children need someone who understands struggle more than they need someone with paper." And so, slowly, Amara began again. Autumn touched the edges of Augusta with golden leaves and cooler winds. The city shifted its weight into the season, and so did Amara. 2 months had passed since she left Ashford Plantation. She no longer woke with fear as her first breath. Her shoulders had learned to settle. Brian's health had improved. The boy had grown stronger, his laughter louder, and his favorite spot was the windowsill of their boarding room, where he'd count the footsteps below and guess where each traveler might be going. Amara watched him with a quiet, steady joy. He had always deserved this peace. They both had. She taught literacy 3 nights a week at the local church. Word had spread, Miss Freeman, the girl who helped others, read their own names. She carried herself gently, but something had sharpened in her since leaving. She no longer shrank when eyes followed her. She stood straighter when questioned. And when men tried to barter smiles from her on the street, she gave them none. Not because she was angry, but because she had learned what it meant to be seen by the wrong kind of eyes. One Sunday evening, after a long day of teaching, she sat beside Brian in their small room, mending his coat. He asked, "Do you think we'll ever see anyone from back then?" Amara paused. "I hope not," she said. But hope, she knew, was a weak barrier against fate. That same night, Silas Ashford stood outside the very church where Amara taught. He hadn't stepped inside. Not yet. He watched the children exit in pairs, watched them wave to the dark-skinned woman who stood in the doorway. She wore no jewelry, no chains. Her hair tied simply. Her hands carried chalk dust, not polish. She was different, but unmistakably her. He did not speak. Not that night. Instead, he returned to the boarding house where he stayed under a false name. He sat by the window and reread her letter. "You gave me a name. I will not let it be a cage." He didn't know what he had expected. Anger, perhaps. Bitterness. But her words were clean, calm. They held no plea, only truth. And yet it haunted him more than if she had screamed. The next morning, he returned. Sat in the back row of the chapel, behind the children. Amara didn't see him at first. She was too busy helping a girl trace letters with her finger. But when she turned to erase the board, her eyes flicked up and froze. He was seated in the shadows, hat low, coat dusty. But she knew. Her fingers tightened on the rag. Her chest rose once, sharply. Then she turned back to the board, hand steady. She did not run, did not cry. She finished the lesson. After the children had gone, she stood at the front, arms crossed. "Why are you here?" Her voice wasn't afraid. Silas stood slowly. "To see you." "You already did," she replied. "Now leave." He stepped forward, but not too close. "I wanted to say thank you." She blinked. "For what?" "For walking away." "For surviving me," he said. She studied him. He looked tired, older. The weight he had once worn like armor now sagged on his shoulders. "You didn't come to free me back then," she said. "You came to feel something. That was never about me." His face flinched. "You're right." A pause. "But this is." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Freedom papers. Yours. Brian's. Signed. Filed. She took it without touching it. Why now? He looked down. Because I should have done it before you had to leave. You didn't set me free, she said, voice cracking. I did that. You just watched. He nodded slowly. Yes. And I will keep watching. But not as your master. Not anymore. She held the paper for a moment, then stepped back. You can't wait for someone to heal you, Silas. Not me. Not anyone. You want to be different? Go be different. But don't come here looking for what I gave up to find myself. He didn't argue. Just placed the paper on the bench and left. As the door closed, Amara sank into a chair, trembling. Not from fear, but from release. The days after Silas left passed like clouds drifting over sun-warmed fields, quiet, slow, and filled with something unnamed. Amara folded the freedom papers carefully and stored them in the jar beneath the floorboard, beside the dwindling coins she still saved. She didn't tell anyone he had come. Not Brian, not the Reverend, not the women in the boarding house who had become like shadows in her quiet life. She carried it silently, like she had carried everything else, pain, hope, and strength stitched tightly into her spine. At the church, the children asked her why she smiled more now. Amara would shrug. But the truth was this: for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for a door to close. She was walking through her own. A month later, the Reverend handed her a letter. A request, he said, for you to speak. Share your story. They say your name's been passed along, from county to county. A woman who teaches. A woman who used to be property and now is her own. She almost said no. Almost. But something deep in her said, tell it yourself before someone else does. So she said yes. The church hall filled on the evening she spoke. Not with just freedmen, but with poor whites, farmhands, traveling traders, and women who brought their daughters with notebooks in their laps. Amara stepped up to the front of the room, heart hammering. She wasn't a speaker. She was a survivor. And that was enough. She told them about chains without metal, about the weight of silence, about being invisible, even while standing in the middle of a room. She told them about Evelyn's slap and Silas's silence, about learning to read by candlelight when the world told her she couldn't, and about what it felt like to fall asleep in a place where she was forbidden, and wake up changed. Not because of the man, she said, but because I saw myself for the first time in a place meant to erase me, and I chose to stay awake. When she finished, the crowd rose. Not with noise, with stillness. A room full of people standing, not for her past, but for the future she carved from it. The next day, the headmistress of a nearby school approached her. You ever think of teaching full-time? Amara smiled. I think of little else. And so, her world grew. Not with gold, not with fame, but with students, syllables, and slow, steady seasons. Back in Savannah, the Ashford name began to fade. The plantation no longer rang with pride. Workers left. Fields wilted. Evelyn married a banker who didn't love her, and Silas moved to the city. He sold the land, donated the profits, changed his last name in the records. Not to run, he told the clerk, but to start with truth this time. They said he built schools, helped fund clinics, spoke little, smiled less, but his hands always shook when he saw the name Freeman in reports. And he always read the letters from Augusta first. Amara never wrote back. She didn't have to. Her life was the reply. On Brian's 13th birthday, she gave him the papers. You keep these, she said, not because we need them, but because you should always know what your name cost. He nodded, tucking them into his satchel. Can I tell people we were slaves? He asked. She paused. No. You tell them we were survivors. That night, she returned to the oak tree near the chapel. A student had planted it during the spring term. She sat under its branches, eyes on the stars. One of her pupils had once asked what freedom tasted like. Like truth, she had said. And truth ain't always sweet. But it's yours. In the quiet, she touched the silver chain around her neck. The one that had once been buried beneath dirt and fear. It shimmered gently in the moonlight. Not as a reminder of him, but as a reminder of who she had become after. A girl once slept in her master's bed by accident. And everything changed. But the real story? The real change was not that she was seen. It was that she never disappeared again.